When I was a boy, my mother often said to me, "Get married, son, and see how happy you will be." I have looked all over, but no girlie can I find who seems to be just like the little girl I have in mind. I will have to look around until the right one I have found.
I can't believe I'm about to say this. I love horror games. Horror games for me is all about the thrill of facing the unknown, combined with the adrenaline rush of trying to survive against the worst of odds. A lot of the times I only ever really feel fulfilled playing a game when it's generally in the horror genre. Simply because I love games that can test your mettle. I love horror games where I gotta look for my wife in some nightmarish wasteland. I love horror games where I gotta make decisions that could or could not lead to my own downfall. And most of all, I love horror games where I'm a little bitch that can't fight back, so I gotta scurry around like a little rat, hiding in lockers or barrels until I can manage to escape. This can be games like the first half of Resident Evil 7, or Amnesia, or a game that gave me an irrational fear of doors along with the dark called Outlast. If you don't know anything about Outlast, this video might not make any sense, but I'll try to get it past you lickety-split so you can follow. So basically the consensus of the story is that you're an investigative reporter by the name of Miles Upshur. You're on the prowl for a new story, and you receive a mysterious email from a whistleblower by the name of Wayland Park, exposing a place called Mount Massive Asylum for their heinous experiments on the patients housed within said asylum. So you, Miles Upshur, take it upon yourself to pull up to their doorstep to find that the asylum has been shaked and very well baked. Now, because you willfully trapped yourself inside the asylum to investigate the horrors, you gotta run, jump, and hide from the deranged inmates that have seized control over the place, and somehow figure out a way to get the fuck out of the joint. For the last decade, I return to this game every year for an annual replay, and it gets better every time. It's in the documents that flesh out the story and lore of the Murkoff Corporation. It's in the sound design that gives you unbridled terror hearing Chris Walker's chains and thumping boots moving toward you. It's either that, or it's Traeger's snipping of his comically large scissors while hunting you. Playing this game, you're sunk into the darkest pits of humanity and are somehow taken even further below that. Investigating the asylum, Miles finds himself faced against one Chris Walker, who relentlessly chases you throughout the game. He's a hulking figure that resembles more of the great white shark than an actual human being. And at face value, he's just a secondary antagonist that serves to add danger and tension in your pursuit to escape. But when reading files scattered throughout the asylum, and even the Outlast comic itself, you learn that Walker is much more than a hulking killing machine. You learn that he was a Murkoff security guard with almost inhuman-like strength, along with the mind of a child. It was during his time as said security guard that his coworkers dubbed Walker Strong Fat, which Walker despised so much so that it one day led to his psyche breaking, killing 3 inmates by tearing them apart and mangling his own face to no longer be or look like Chris Walker. In my first draft of my script and a flash of creativity, I was gonna do a whole joke about how he's just a sweet and lovable guy that may look like a monster on the outside, yet has a sweet gooey center underneath. Why do I write like that? Now there's also Richard Traeger, a not so lovable guy that while under the employ of the Murkoff Corporation decided to use his position to lure women out on dates, spike their drinks, and have his way with them. Now to keep a long story short, Traeger was exposed for his actions, thus Traeger became royally pissed, claiming that the women that exposed him were lying bitches as he then proceeded to stab one of the women several times. That was until he was later tackled into a paper shredder which caught onto his hair, mangling his head, after which Traeger was taken in as an inmate into the asylum and used as a test subject for the morphogenic engine, where in present day, Traeger was one of the inmates to break free and before long had set up his own personal torture chamber in the upper floors of the asylum's male ward, going on to capture, mutilate, and torture countless former inmates, employees, and Miles. Initially, I was going to make the video centered around Traeger because I felt that just his presence alone was enough to convey what I felt to be the most vile villain in gaming. I really wanted to talk about Traeger extensively and go over how he is heavily psychotic and manipulative, and how really the only thing that makes him insane is his deep desire to hurt and kill people, making him a sadist and a murderer. His section is viscerally horrifying. You literally see firsthand what can happen if Traeger catches you, and it's a fate far worse than death. But Traeger being the villain to go over just isn't the case anymore, because there's a villain in this game that I found to be worse, if not more vile and vulgar than Traeger, and his name is Eddie Gluskin.
Die.
So who is Eddie Gluskin? All that is really known about Eddie Gluskin's early life is that he was sexually abused by his father and uncle, who would take photos of the incident. Suffering from something horrific like that, Eddie as a child had no idea that it was wrong. Eddie thought it was normal that his family did those things to him. He thought that it was normal to be pulled apart from the inside out. He thought it was normal that the people that were his family, his protectors, would violate him time and again. In a document, Eddie exclaimed that while his father and uncle would document the obscenities, his mother, knowing what had been going on, watched on the sidelines, refusing to do anything to save her son. Having no idea how to comprehend the madness that Eddie was living day in and day out, just knowing that with each time his father or uncle had their way, Eddie would end up cataclysmically hurt after the fact, in which Eddie developed a coping mechanism to bury all the craziness deep down that he was suffering from, referring to his childhood as the typical Leave It to Beaver kind of home. Thankfully, Eddie's father and uncle were eventually incarcerated. However, it was far too late to save Eddie. Eddie by that point had already been chewed up and spat back out. He had internalized all the violations, the abuse, and trauma the best way he thought he could, by becoming a serial killer. No matter how much Eddie seeked to escape his past, it always came back, like a raw nerve, feeling that sadness, that embarrassment, that violation, over and over again. His insanity stemmed from the sexual abuse he endured as a child, becoming a misogynistic serial killer, in turn mutilating women. Eddie targeting these women is most likely attributed to the fact that his mother sat back and did nothing to stop his father or uncle from having their way with him, and before being incarcerated at Mount Massive Asylum had killed 3 women in the process. While in the asylum's care, if you could even call it that, Eddie was given a psychiatric evaluation, finding that Eddie had a deceptively kind personality. He is, by and large, very charming, though upon rejected, he can become violent, as seen when you manage to outmaneuver him throughout the game, insulting you for choosing to rather die than be with him.
Oh God! Oh God! Are you okay? Tell me you're okay! I hate you suffering without me. Why would you do something like that to yourself? Rather die than be with me. Then die.
As he is obsessed with the idea of his perfect bride, to the point where he mutilates people he deems mentally acceptable to make them physically acceptable as well. He appears to be only interested in taking men and removing or adding parts to create a woman by removing the penis, testicles, and excess body hair, as well as stuffing the body to create breasts. His charming personality often slips when he is rejected, and he teeters dangerously between complimenting his bride's appearance and personality and insulting them. He also completely refuses to accept the difference between what he believes and the actual reality. He also completely refuses to admit that he killed his victims, refusing to admit that they were dead or mutilated. That's Eddie Gluskin. He's nothing short of deranged, and I bet you can see now why I decided to center this video around him instead. Now, while you could make the argument that he is a victim of his family's actions, I do not believe that entitles him to become a serial killer and mutilate people the way he does. Not by a long shot. But it's in that same degree where I can't help but feel bad for his tragic upbringing. No child should have to go through something as appalling as that ever. And I'll also add that when forced to take part in Murkoff's experiments, he began to have warped perceptions and delusions of marriage, women, and wanting children. So when the asylum riot began, there were no women in the asylum. So in his delusional state, he captured other variants and brutally attempted to perform sex changes on them. The victims would die before the process was completed, either during the surgery or killed by Eddie while he was driven further into his delusions. But due to most, if not all, of these procedures turning out unsuccessful, Eddie would either string his victims up in the gymnasium or decorate the vocational block with their mutilated corpses in extremely grotesque fashions. But since I've gone through Eddie Gluskin extensively in this little section, I'm now going to take you through the events of the game. Starting off, you are Wayland Park, a software engineer working at Mount Massive Asylum for the Murkoff Corporation. After several encounters working directly with the morphogenic engine and witnessing the torture that the Murkoff Corporation inflicts on its inmates, Wayland decides to blow the lid on the corporation and its horrific experiments. Upon sending the email to investigative reporter Miles Upshur, who you play as in the main game, you're called in to prepare the morphogenic engine for an inmate by the name of Eddie Gluskin. Making the preparations for the software, you come face to face with Eddie for the first time, begging and pleading for Wayland to stop this.
Help me! Don't let them do this! Don't let them... You! I know you can stop this! You have to help me!
Only for him to be dragged kicking and screaming into the machine against his will anyway. Now, upon the machine's activation, you see firsthand the brutality dealt out to the inmates, as Eddie's face begins to become disfigured. This is later revealed through a document that the disfigurement was caused after the tubing was switched from a certain material to latex to elicit an allergic reaction. This not only suggests that Gluskin is allergic to latex, but furthermore shows that Murkoff would be willing to go through the trouble of reinstalling tubing that patients show a negative reaction to, just to get even the most minuscule reaction of discomfort from the variants. Truly abhorrent. Also, in the main game's final chapter in the underground lab, the sphere Gluskin was forced into during the intro appears damaged, with Gluskin being very much alive after the Walrider's outbreak. This could mean that he broke out by himself, possibly stopping his therapy mid-session. This could further explain his less than lucid and confused mental state at the time Wayland encounters him, though this is something that's very out there and up to speculation. Shortly after finishing up and returning to Wayland's laptop, he is caught by his employer, Jeremy Blair. He's a fucking asshole. That's really all you need to know about him. And as punishment, Blair has Park committed and forced to endure the tests of the morphogenic engine. So a couple licks at the head here, and a few horrific hallucinations later, the Walrider breaks free and begins causing chaos at Mount Massive, where Wayland manages to break out of his restraints and takes a camcorder with him. I feel like before we go on, I should mention who the Walrider is, because this is totally random. Basically, the Walrider is the source of the madness that seems to infect most of the asylum's inhabitants. While appearing ghostly in nature, the Walrider is actually a swarm of nanites, controlled by an inmate called William Billy Hope, who simply learned how to control the swarm. He's also known as the first patient to fully manifest the Walrider. The exact nature of the swarm is unknown, but it is implied that the Walrider is created by the host in their own body, through psychosomatic direction. That's the purpose of the morphogenic engine, turning the cells in the body into nanofactories. I hope a bit of that makes sense, but if not, we're gonna keep going anyway. After eluding the Walrider, you as Wayland have to sneak through the asylum, making sure not to get swarmed by inmates running amok through the joint. Roaming through the facility, you witness surviving guards and personnel try to escape from the newly freed prisoners, some brutally murdered or some hiding in rooms quaking with fear of being found, while Wayland attempts to find a radio that he can use to contact the authorities. During this time, Wayland consistently eludes a bearded, cannibalistic prisoner named Frank Monera, who wields a saw blade and tries to kill Wayland in many different ways. Little is known about Monera, other than a document that exclaims he was lethargic and largely non-responsive. He also refused baths and other attentions from the barber apart from anesthesia, stating, "If I cannot partake, I cannot share." His patient documents also mention that forced nutrition would be recommended for Monera if they could not find something that he likes to eat. He wouldn't eat because, well, he craved people. His patient report also mentions that he had a history of smoking tobacco and marijuana. So perhaps he was a chill guy before whatever turned him towards cannibalism, since the creators hinted that he was something of a yoga instructor and an amateur cook on the side, but who knows. So back to it, Monera attempts to kill Wayland in various different ways, including trapping him in a furnace. However, Wayland ultimately escapes Monera's clutches, angrily adding that Wayland was supposed to be his, after which Monera is never seen again. Traversing through the asylum's ins and outs, Wayland manages to find a radio. However, Blair, that fucking asshole, appears and destroys it, insisting that no one can reveal the secret of Mount Massive, where he then leaves Wayland to die at the hands of Chris Walker, only for Wayland to escape. Wayland eventually wanders into a secluded area of the vocational block, where a variant by the name of Dennis with dissociative identity disorder captures and offers inmates as a sacrifice to Eddie Gluskin, whom he calls the Groom. Evading Dennis, we're given a clue as to how haunting Eddie is if captured, when a random inmate grabs Wayland to warn him about the Groom.
Quiet! If they catch us, they'll give us to him. The man downstairs. The man. Very bad. Very, very bad. God. Oh, God.
Shortly afterward, Walking down to the third floor, our eyes lay upon one of Eddie's vile scenes, displaying his ultimate fantasy come to light. Waylon, terrified, tries to navigate through the corridors, leading him to attempt to open a locked door, only to be greeted with Eddie, who presses his face against the glass of the door, smiling and calling Waylon Darling. While initially eluding Eddie, Waylon falls into an elevator shaft and gets a piece of debris lodged in his right shin, reducing him to a limp.
Tell me you're okay. You suffering without me. Why would you do something like that to yourself? Rather die than be with me.
Waylon is eventually captured after being lured into a corner with nowhere left to run except to hide in a nearby locker. Eddie traps Waylon inside, where Waylon is then dragged towards Eddie's workshop where Eddie mutilates others. It's here where you get a taste of his lunacy and also hear some interesting things come out of his mouth.
I've been a little vulgar. And I want to say I'm sorry. You know how a man gets when he wants to know. But after the ceremony, when I've made an honest woman of you, I promise I'll be a different man. I want a family, a legacy. To be the father I never had. I'll never let anything happen to our children. Not like... I have to wait here. I know you must be just as eager as I am to consummate our love. But try to enjoy the anticipation. Darling, this will help you relax.
Where Waylon wakes up 12 hours later and sees Gluskin mutilate other captive inmates through the slits of the locker's door. It's a long and grotesque watch that makes my skin crawl no matter how many times I play. Witnessing this horror, I can't help but imagine what someone in that position must feel like. But shortly after this, Eddie strips Waylon of all of his clothes and places him on a table, preparing to cut him with a buzzsaw, with Waylon's body placed so that his genitals are aimed towards the blade. Oh man, this video is getting demonetized. However, just before the spinning buzzsaw reaches Waylon's body, a variant comes in and engages in a fight with Eddie. It isn't ever made clear on who the random prisoner is, but my theory is that it's that one guy who warned us about Eddie right before entering his section of the game. And whether this prisoner managed to escape from Eddie is also unknown, but it's more than likely that he died. So in the wake of that prisoner's self-sacrifice, Waylon uses this distraction as an opportunity to escape through a broken window, breaking his own leg in the process.
Fine. Go! You and the rest of these ungrateful sluts!
Once Waylon escapes, he is forced to go back into the block and find the key that unlocks the door to the male ward. So Eddie continues his pursuit of Waylon and captures him once more while trying to attain the key to his own freedom, attempting to hang him on a pulley system, along with many previously deceased and mutilated hanging victims. In one of his notes, Waylon compares Gluskin's actions to that of Bluebeard. Bodies hanging like wet laundry, like skinned rabbits. Men mutilated, hunted, and murdered. The shortest distance between any 2 points separates violence and ruined lust. Whatever story he's telling himself, he's not making women to bear his children. He's making women to kill them. This man thinks he's in love. He thinks the therapy made him better. Everything reeks of death and fear. Piss and coppery blood. Meat decomposing to game. It's an eerie sight to behold. So Eddie, in the process of hanging Waylon struggles for his life as he is lifted, with his weight causing some of the ceiling and the pulley system to break away, which forces Eddie to use more strength to lift and hang Waylon. Eventually, Waylon's weight becomes too great of a burden for Eddie to lift, so this causes a sudden weight shift in the pulley.
Hold still. God damn it, what are you... Ah! Oh, damn it, darling! No, you need to behave! Ah! Ah! We could have been beautiful.
Eddie Gluskin is no more, but the work he left behind will never be forgotten. I find what Waylon writes in a document directly after this moment to be most compelling. He's dead. The amateur surgeon, father-to-be husband, he's got shredded and pulled from his belly. I'm trying not to laugh. God. Lisa, I swear to you, I'm trying. As daylight finally breaks, Waylon continues throughout the asylum, discovering that Murkoff's paramilitary forces have already arrived at the scene and are killing every prisoner they see. Waylon manages to elude them as they are all killed by the Walrider and makes it to the main atrium. There he finds a wounded Blair, lying against the front door and pleading for help. However, as Park approaches, Blair stabs him in the stomach with a knife, declaring that no one can know the truth. Before he can deliver the finishing blow, he is attacked and killed by the Walrider. With that stroke of luck, Waylon staggers out the open front door and past the military vehicles, towards a red Jeep waiting by the security gate. As Waylon enters the Jeep and starts it up, he notices a dark figure, Miles Upsher's Walrider sustained broken body, slowly exiting the asylum with a dark mist surrounding it. It's in the epilogue scene that a fully recovered Waylon has gotten in contact with a leaking organization to submit his secret information on Murkoff, along with all the recording he managed to take on the camcorder. Waylon sits against a laptop with a video file of all his recorded video from the asylum, ready to be uploaded to the internet, with the man associated with the leaking website standing in front of his desk, informing him that it will be more than enough evidence to ruin the Murkoff Corporation, but warns Waylon that doing so will result in Murkoff doing everything it can to punish him in return. Despite some initial hesitation, Waylon ultimately decides to take the risk and uploads the video. When asked about the inspiration behind Eddie's design, series designer Felipe Morin stated that Eddie was not inspired by any specific character, but rather retroactively designed to fit into pre-existing in-game sequences that centered around the protagonist's torture. Said sequences were inspired by similar torture scenes from Wes Craven's 1988 film the Serpent and the Rainbow. From taking a look at the film for this video, I can definitely see for myself some of the inspiration and suggest everyone to give it a watch as well. Something slightly funny I also wanted to add was when answering a fan-submitted question in regards to which two variants in Mount Massive are most likely to be best friends, series writer JT Petty commented that the likeliest duo would be Frank Monera and Eddie Gluskin. I didn't know how or where to add these little factoids, but there you have it. I hope I managed to convey to you why I view Eddie Gluskin as one of the most vile villains in gaming ever. I feel as though he takes that spot for me since no other villain in gaming has really ever managed to make me feel so viscerally appalled than Eddie. I think that while his backstory is rather tragic, the monster he later builds himself up to be is utterly vile. It's not only in the act and killing and the way he goes about it, but how he has no regard for human life whatsoever. Eddie is so lost in his own insanity that he doesn't even think he's killing these people. He doesn't view what he's doing as wrong in any capacity. In his warped view of the world, he thinks he can create his perfect bride, his perfect woman, and his own twisted children at the cost of others. I mean, for God's sake, he manages to fill an entire gymnasium ceiling with his victims, for crying out loud. Even the toughest of inmates you have to evade refer to Eddie as that evil thing, like the boogeyman. Walking into his section of the game, it feels hopeless, and when you come face to face with him, it's like the stuff of nightmares. I genuinely can't express enough how terrifying his section is in the game. You just have to play it for yourself. But I think what shakes me to my core about Eddie the most is that there is someone in this world that is like this most likely. Someone who is willing to tear someone apart, contort them, break them, and mangle them until they are unrecognizable. And once that monster is finished with them, it never stops. It's on to the hunt again for another, and another, and another, and another. That thought terrifies me, because there are many monsters in this world. All I can say to end this video is be careful, because you never know who or what is around the corner waiting for you.